friend Tiara is going to be doing our children's story. So come on forward, kids. It's time for your worship, the special worship with Tiara.
So, who goes to school? Who goes to school? You go to school. Have any of you had a test at school recently? All the time? All right. So my friend Tommy was really, really good at math. Like, really good. He got A's on all his homework. He aced majority of the stuff. And so the teacher said, you know what? It's time for a big test. A big math test. And Tommy thought to himself, he's like, I don't need to work hard on knowing. I already know everything. This is going to be awesome. So the test came, and he was sitting by his friend, John. And he was sitting there, and he started the test, and he knew the first answer and the second answer. But then he got to the third answer, and it was a little more tricky. It was trickier for him, and he was like, well, I think I know. And he kept going, and he got to another answer, and he didn't know it. But on this side where John was, he could see his paper. And John was a pretty good math student as well. And so he just kind of peeked over because he saw that they were on the same question. So he looked, and do you know what he did? He copied, you're right. So he copied, and he answered once he could, but then he kept copying John and cheating. Well, after that test, a couple days later, they got the test results back. Do you think he got an A on that test? No, he didn't. And he looked at it. He looked at his first D ever, and he was like, oh, well, first of all, I feel really bad for cheating because that goes against what I believe. And second of all, I didn't do my best at all. So the teacher told them that they were going to have another test in a few weeks. And so instead of waiting till the last night or not studying at all, what do you think Tommy did? He studied every single night, and he studied really hard. And when the test came and he was sitting by Johnny, he put up a barrier. He had a folder and he put it up so he couldn't be cheating and he couldn't be tempted. So a few days later, the test came, and what grade do you think he got? An A, right. He did his best. He did it without cheating, and he worked his hardest. Now, if you were at Journey Christian School this week, you have had tests, right? You've had lots of tests. And I want to say that the students have done a great job at tests because they worked hard and learned their stuff and persevered. Does anybody know what persevere means? To keep on, to keep going. And I know all of you guys can keep doing that at school and outside of school. But Hebrews 6:11 says, we want each of you to go on with the same hard work all your lives. Then you will surely get what you hope for. So yes, it may be hard, but keep going and keep striving because guess what? The end result is so worth it. All right, guys? Now, before we go, we're going to do lamb's offering, okay? So you guys can get the buckets. And if my older students and friends could come up and help the younger ones, that would be great. Oh, thank you.
Prayer at this time if you have something, a burden on your heart or just a praise. I was going to tell you that I had a birthday yesterday, Vicki and I, but Dave already said that. But we're stretching out, so I'm having a party today. I'm still accepting gifts though, just in case you're thinking that. But anyway, you know what? As I was praying over this time here that I'm praying, I was at my table, and God has just been bombarding me with things, because I said, I want to pray what you want them to hear. And, I'm having a party, and then I realized God said, I had a party twice in heaven. The first party was the pre-birthday party when I planned you. And, that's in Jeremiah 1:5 says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. And then there was another party, the second one, the day I was born. Because God said, you're my gift to myself. I created you. I planned you because I needed some more. I had so much love that I wanted somebody else. I want to give that love to, and I wanted you to give the love back to me. So that was a second party in heaven on that day. And then, oh my goodness, then he went even farther. The day you were born, he says, more than that, I'm giving you to the world. You're my gift to the world. And I planned you to be born in the 20th century or the 21st century because you're my gift to that time. That is so important that we remember that. You're my gift to Longview. You're here for a reason. You're God's gift to Longview. You're God's gift to somebody that needs you. How desperately. Remember in Jeremiah, he said, you were born because I set you apart. There's you were not happenstance while you were born. You were born out of God's absolute love for this world and for the dying people of this world. So there is a plan for you. It's if we want to open up ourselves to the world. That is our choice, right? There's some that haven't learned that choice, but there is a choice for them. And maybe it's us, you, right now. You were born for a reason, dear. Yeah, you were born for a reason, Kathy. For right now. Maybe the time is coming. Anyway, I was just in awe. I stood there and I sat there and I just praised God for having me at this time. I praise God for you, for the family that I have right here. What a birthday present you are to me and to Vicki. Anyway, let's pray. Oh God in heaven, our Father, thank you so much for creating each one of us for a special time, a special place. Boy, Lord, if you need us now, the world needs us. The world needs you. With these mega viruses coming, with these earthquakes, with this cancer that's on the rise, Lord. Oh, you need us to be your voice. Let us do that, Lord. Give us a heart for you. Give us a heart for those that are longing for something that this world does not give, but only you give. You are the gift. You are the gift for everyone. Thank you so much, Lord. Amen.
Good morning. Whew, that's loud. Good morning. Better. Good morning. So I can imagine some of you right now are looking at me, those of you that have been here before when I've preached, and you're thinking to yourself, Oh my, that's different. And some of you, there are a select few, we won't name names, that are probably thinking to yourself, yes, we broke him. And if this is your first time here, I will explain. Normally, when I get up here to preach, I am wearing a suit, a nice dress shirt, typically no tie, except when Dave Wilson's not here, then I bust it out. We're in the middle of a series, and last week I talked about a man named Nicodemus. I talked about his journey from meeting Jesus in the garden very tentatively, hiding in the darkness and in his words, all the way up to the last time he's talked about in the biblical story, where he stands before the cross, looking at this man that he's met before, but without saying a word, acknowledging him as king. In theology, we have this big word, and it's called salvation. Salvation is a word that we like to throw around, and it's this process by which we're saved. It's God's big plan for humanity to make sure that sin doesn't consume us. And inside of salvation, theologians have broken this term down into three parts. So for those of you that are probably jumping ahead of me a little bit, you're thinking, okay, well, 3 sermons, 3 parts. He's probably going to talk about 1 part per Sabbath, and that would be true. I've titled this series Simplicity because we're taking those 3 parts and we're looking at them just a little bit different. That first part is one that many of us are familiar with. It's this word that we call justification. Standing right before God when he stands before us and he says, "You are good. You are my child." That sin that had twisted and turned you into something that you're not, that's not how I see you. The second word in this process that we call salvation is this one that we're very familiar with in the Adventist church. It's called sanctification. We've used phrases like justification is the act of a moment, and sanctification is the act of a lifetime. That it's something that has to take a while, that it's this process that we go through, and typically there's some behavior changes that get associated with sanctification. This process of being made right. Because if you accept Jesus and that makes you justified, but then what do you do when you see the cross and the empty tomb? How do you live in response to that? And that's what sanctification is. It's this process we enter. When I was at Walla Walla University and I was talking to a professor a little bit about this idea of sanctification, another student raised his hand and he said, well, I'd heard it this way. Sanctification, Jesus kind of spells it out for us, and it comes to us in Matthew chapter 5, right there at the beginning, and it's this famous list of verses that we call the Beatitudes. And in this process, Jesus names a group of people, and he starts out and he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." He says, so that's how we start out. We're poor in spirit. And when you're poor in spirit, then you can't help but be meek, which is the next group. And then when you're meek, you can't help but mourn. And when you mourn, you can't help but hunger and thirst for righteousness. And then once you're hungry for righteousness, you can't help but be merciful. And when you're merciful, you can't help but be pure in heart. When you're pure in heart, you can't help but be a peacemaker. And once you're a peacemaker stuck in the middle, you can't help but be persecuted for righteousness' sake. And it was like, wow, that's really cool. What a neat cycle that Jesus sort of lays out there. And naturally, I began to think of this. I began to read through this list and try to identify where I was in those groups of the blessed. So I looked through and I started reading, I don't think I'm poor in spirit. I don't think I'm meek. I don't think I'm mourning. I like to think I'm hungry and thirsty for righteousness, but what about peacemaker? I think I'm a pretty good peacemaker amongst my friends. Last week, David Futcher told me that I looked like a 12-year-old, so perhaps I'm persecuted. Yeah. I guess that confirms it. I'm one of those last ones, so you can all look up to me now as you journey along. But it's natural that we take these things, once we find a list or something like that in the Bible, we begin to play theological hopscotch with it. And we try to figure out which hoops I have to get through. Which ones have I gone through? Where am I going? And what is left on the grocery list, so to speak, before I'm fully sanctified? There's a story that follows that of Nicodemus that I think gives us a little different perspective on how Jesus looks at sanctification. And it's in John chapter 4. You could probably tell by the verse that I chose for the bulletin what this story is about. See, after Nicodemus talks to Jesus, Jesus actually goes to the Jordan River, and he and his disciples are baptizing people. And the Pharisees hear this. The teachers of the law hear that Jesus is baptizing people, and he's not just baptizing people, he's baptizing more than John the Baptist. He's baptizing more people, and so it seems like this number is growing, and so before things can get out of hand, Jesus actually says to his disciples, let's go north, let's go to Galilee, a northern area where the Jesus' hometown of Nazareth would be, where many of the disciples would be from. So he says, let's go there. But before they can get there, they have to cross through this area of land called Samaria, where this group of people called the Samaritans live. And it's in this space during their journey north that Jesus is sitting down. It's about the noon hour, and he sits down next to a well. And behold, a woman from Samaria came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, give me a drink. Give me a drink. And John kind of fills in the subtext for us. It helps us understand why Jesus is alone in this moment. For his disciples had gone away to buy food in the city. Then the Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? Now, if we just read this, if we read that phrase and that's where we ended the story, we'd think to ourselves, oh, okay, well, maybe she's just caught off guard. Maybe, there's this strange man who's sitting there. He doesn't really explain himself, and the first words he says to her are, give me a drink. So maybe he just caught her off guard. Maybe she was just not expecting this man. She was just trying to do her chore and get out of there. And some stranger starts talking to her. But John fills in the cultural subtext that we wouldn't catch otherwise. He spells it out for us, and he says, for Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. The term Samaritan is one that we are fairly we know about it in the Bible. It's one that we've heard about. The most famous, perhaps, is the story of the Good Samaritan, that parable that Jesus tells, sort of exposing one of the teacher's ideas of who his neighbor might be, expanding that circle for him. The Samaritans, their historical background, to put them in perspective, is this. They are some of the descendants from the northern kingdom. After Solomon and David had established the kingdom of Israel, Solomon's son Rehoboam decided to raise the taxes, and the people rebelled. About 10 tribes of the 12 rebelled, and they went and made their own kingdom. And they called themselves the kingdom of Israel, so the southern kingdom became the kingdom of Judah, and they had named a king named Jeroboam. And these two kingdoms operated independently of one another for a bit, until one day, a group called the Assyrians roll in, the same group that Jonah eventually goes and talks to. They show up, and they just absolutely decimate the northern kingdom, wipe them off the face of the earth. And they had this practice when they would show up and they'd siege places and they'd take over land. They would take about 90% of the local populace and they'd move them to other parts of the empire, so leaving only about 10% of that local group there. And then to replace all those people that they just moved out, they'd bring in random people from the other parts of their empire in, so that there wasn't this natural connection to the ground, to the land that they were now on. So there's no need to rebel, because this isn't my land. I'm just here. And as the generations went on, Naturally, some of these people from the northern kingdom began to intermarry with those new people that had arrived. And the people in the southern kingdom began to resent and despise these people that were then dubbed Samaritans. They were the half-bloods, the half-breeds, the others, the people out there that we don't really like. They rejected their claim to Abraham's promise, to the covenant that God made. That no longer applies to them because they're not really Jewish. And so for Jesus, a Jewish man, to talk to a Samaritan, let alone a Samaritan woman, Jesus is scaling a cultural wall here. And just by interacting with her. And of course, in our world today, we don't have this problem of us and them. That's not something we suffer from at all. No, of course not. Of course not. We live in a world that is perhaps more divided than ever. We live in a world that is increasingly divided. We operate with this idea of, oh, there's us, the 49ers fans, against them, the Chiefs fans. We operate in a world where it is us, the young people, against them, the old people. A world that says us, the people with a college degree, against them that don't. And as much as I'd like to say that within Christianity that's not the case, that's not. From the biggest perspective, we have us, the theists, the people who believe in some form of God, against them, the atheists. Within that, though, we have us, the Christians, against them, the Muslims or the Buddhists or the Hindus. We have us, the Protestants, against them, the Catholics. We have us, the Seventh-day Adventists, against them, the Methodists or the Baptists. Within Adventism, we have us, the conservatives, against them, the liberals. We have us, the suit wearers, against them, the jean wearers. We have us, the people who like drums, against them, the people that don't like drums. We have us who like hymns, against them who like contemporary. We have us, the private sinners, against them, the public sinners. And too often, this is what we've turned sanctification into, is this comparison game that we play between me, or us, and those other people out there, that I'm better than, that I'm closer to the cross than they are, that I'm deeper in my relationship with Jesus and my behavior darn well shows it, and theirs doesn't. Therefore, I'm more sanctified than them. And Jesus, in response to this comparison game that this Samaritan woman has already alluded to, says this: if you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Seems a little bit out of context, like it's a different conversation that Jesus is having. He's not addressing the ethnocentric argument that this woman is beginning to raise. Rather, he's saying, no, that's not what's important here. I want you to think about living water. And then they go back and forth for a little bit. This woman then says, well, how are you going to get this water? The well's really deep. You have no bucket, nothing to get it out, and what is this living water? How's it different from the real stuff? And Jesus says, well, this living water, it never runs out. See, the stuff that you're drinking right now, in about half an hour, you're going to be dry as the dust around you. But this living water, it's sustainable. It lasts forever. And so the woman says, sir, give me this water, so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. Seems like the story's over there, but I can hear some of you, maybe in your minds, or someone who's watching this on YouTube later, thinking to themselves, okay, well, if sanctification isn't about comparison, that's not good. It's not a competition between me and the guy next to me in the pew. Well, it seems like you're overlooking sin there, Pastor. It seems like you're kind of jumping over that idea, that the mistakes that I make or the behavior that hasn't changed, that's an issue. And that needs to change. And if I'm really in love with Jesus, then my behavior will change. And yes, it will. I would argue that. But sometimes we've turned sanctification into something that's all about sin and all about the problems that I've made, all the mistakes that I've made, and how I need to fix them. When I was in high school, I was 17 years old, and my best friend, his name is Jonathan. He'll be here in a couple weeks, actually, so you guys will get to meet him. But he is a skilled classical guitarist. And so he was at Walla Walla at the time, and he told me, hey, Nick, we've got this wedding. I've been invited to play the music for this wedding. You're a violinist. I'd like you to come join me. I said, great, that'd be awesome. And we invited another friend. Her name was Mindy, and she played the cello. And so the three of us put together this trio, and we came up with a couple songs that we were going to do, and the bride and groom had asked for a special song that we would do. Hi, Killian. So we came up with a couple special songs that we would do. And as we're setting this up, as we're prepping, we go over the songs over and over and over. We have them down to the moment. We've got them nailed down. We have our music printed out. So the morning comes for the wedding, and we drive out. And it was about an hour and a half drive to get to this wedding venue. So we piled in the car, we're cruising along, and we're talking, and it's great. We get to the wedding venue. This is an outdoor wedding with live acoustic instruments. And we're like, all right, cool, is there going to be mics or anything? No, apparently there's going to be no mics. All right, cool. Well, where do you guys want us? So they point over to this spot, and it's like the edge of a ravine almost is kind of where they're placing us. It was this beautiful backdrop of the gorge. It's very, very beautiful, but they sit us down and they say, all right, set up our music stands and everything. And we begin to realize that if you're in the channel of the gorge, the wind begins to pick up every here and there, and the gusts of winds kind of come through. And if you've ever played with sheet music or any paper that's supposed to stay in a spot when the wind picks up, it tends not to stay. And so we weren't accounting for this, and we're beginning to realize that our music is like flipping over itself, and it might start flying away. So we're pulling out our phones and any little knickknacks we have to try and weigh this paper down so we can actually play. So as we're sitting there and I'm looking out, part of my role as the violinist was I was going to look out and kind of be the cue to know when to end the processional, to know when the bride's coming down, so we'd have an idea of about how much longer do we need to play before we can wrap this up. And having been to weddings before, I understood that culturally we do this thing when the bride comes down the aisle, we stand up. And so I'm thinking in the back of my mind, that's my cue. When everybody stands up, then I'll be able to know that we've got about 30 more seconds, we'll find a nice stopping point, and we'll end. Perfect. Well, the processional starts happening, we're playing away, and first bridesmaid comes down, lines up. Second bridesmaid comes down and lines up. The third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and the eighth bridesmaid all line up right in front of us. So I'm staring at this line of mint green dresses, and I'm thinking to myself, well, that's inconvenient. So now I'm trying to peer between arms and trying to get a view of the audience while trying to maintain my playing. And as I'm peering around, they're not standing up. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's kind of weird. Maybe she's taking a little bit. Maybe she had to come down the stairs or something. And after about, I'd say 45 seconds of trying to find the bride, my eyes looked over, and I locked eyes with the bride and groom, who were standing there doing this. And I panicked. and just stopped playing. Middle of the phrase, didn't finish the chord, nothing. Just, it was almost like when you pause something on like your iPod or something. Like, it was like that, just someone pulled the cord on the musicians and they just stopped. As you can imagine, in this moment, I'm feeling very embarrassed by what had happened. We're doing this on their special day. It's something that they're going to remember forever, and the musicians just sort of awkwardly stopped playing in the middle. Well, as the rest of the ceremony went off without a hitch, and I'm looking at the guitarist, Jonathan, and Mindy, the cellist, and we're looking at ourselves going like, this is so embarrassing. This is so awkward. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do this. So we decided to, take off. We packed up our stuff, and we decided, the reception would be nice, but, we're feeling really awkward about this whole thing, so we'd rather just eat our humble pie now and take off. So we did. We hopped in the car, we put our stuff in the car, drove away. About 45 minutes down the road, Jonathan's phone rang, and it was the best man calling us, saying, "Where are you guys?" And we're thinking, what did we just do? What else do you need from us? We've already embarrassed ourselves enough. We don't want to go back. And he goes, well, now's your time to play a special song. We're already 45 minutes down the road, mind you. It's going to take us at least 50 minutes to turn around and drive back. So we had to very awkwardly tell this best man that we would not be returning, and that if they'd been thinking about paying us, because they'd talked about it, they didn't need to worry about that. We just wanted to be as far away from this place of shame as possible. And again, this is sometimes how we think of sanctification. It's this place where I, the sinner, and them, my sins, come. And we sit in this environment, we sort of throw ourselves a pity party, and we're waiting, and we're looking up at God, and God's there, and he's holding his hand back, and he's saying, not good enough yet. Sanctification has sometimes been viewed by us as a form of purgatory, where we're just waiting for God's just standing there, and he's like, well, maybe 5 more years, and then you'll be not sinful enough to come stand in my presence, to be in that relationship with me. And so we sit there and we sort of flog ourselves with our words and our thoughts, and we wait in our shame and our sorrow, and we just want it to be over. And that's not what sanctification is about. You see, Jesus, when he talks to this woman, he says this, "Go, call your husband, and come here." The woman answered to him, "I have no husband." And Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one that you're with now is not your husband. What you have said is true." In that moment, when we're reading this just plainly, sometimes we look at it and we go like, wow, Jesus is kind of calling her out here. He's kind of pointing it out. He knows this has been an issue of problems for her, an area that hasn't gone so well, and it feels like Jesus might be shaming her a little bit. But I think when you look at the first thing that Jesus says here, it tells us a lot more about his heart than that. Jesus says, "Go call your husband," so he's acknowledging that there might be a problem here, letting her be honest about that. But what follows that, in his following comments, is not some shame-filled, "You're a terrible sinner and you deserve to just sit here in your squalor." No. Go call your husband and come here. Come to me. That's the crazy thing about this God that we serve. And this process of sanctification is that God's entire priority is not deal with your sin and then come talk to me. is, oh, you've sinned? Let's work it out. Let's deal with this right now. So the woman then responds, Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. Our fathers, the Samaritans, worshipped on this mountain, Mount Gerizim. But you say, the Jews, say that Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. So she's trying to now turn question with a theological undertone in there. Yeah, you're a good guy, you're a prophet, you clearly know some stuff, but settle this theology problem for me. Where are we supposed to worship? Are we supposed to worship where you say or where we say? Who's right? Jesus answers, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And the woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. And Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Jesus' response to her theological question is saying, you're missing the point. You're trying to isolate God's here, or he's there, or he's in that tree, or in that symbol. And Jesus turns around and he says he's right here. He says he's right here. When we look at this term sanctification, we've defined it as what it's not. It's not some competition between people, and it's not some pity party over our sins. That's not God's response. God's response is this. When we define the term sanctification, if you Googled it, the term sanctification would say something like this. It is the process of being made holy, or the process of being sanctified. And the woman, the Samaritan woman, has already tried to bring history into her argument with Jesus about her people being more saved than the Jews. Well, Jacob is what endorses this. Well, actually, what's interesting is the first place that this term sanctification appears is before Jacob. It's long before Jacob. It's actually in Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. And it's the capstone of the creation narrative. It says this, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Literally, God blessed the Sabbath day and he sanctified it. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, okay, that's cool. He sanctified the day, but how does that apply to me? How does he sanctify me, the human? And for crying out loud, we don't even know how to understand this idea of the day. Keep the Sabbath, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. It's kind of a vague phrase, and we try to come up with little rules. Can I eat cheese on that day? Can I watch TV? Can I go out to eat? Can I go out on a hike? Can I go swimming? What can I do? How do I keep it holy? There's a scholar who defines sanctification as this. When God sanctified the Sabbath day, he did this. By blessing the Sabbath day, and by filling it with his presence, God sanctified it. So my question is, can I be blessed by God? And can I be filled by his presence? Can I be sanctified? Yes. Going back to the Beatitudes, rather than thinking of them as some grocery shopping list that we have to get through all the little stages of, I'd argue what Jesus is saying here is everyone is blessed regardless of what season of life you're in. Whether you believe that you're persecuted in this moment or if you're poor in spirit, yours is the kingdom of heaven. Furthermore, when Jesus says, let me offer you living water, he's not talking about some substance that he's giving you. He's talking about himself. He's saying, I want to come and dwell with you. And that is the process of sanctification. Sanctification, the real us and them in sanctification is not us here in this pew against them behind me. It's us, humanity, being blessed and filled by them, the Trinity. This Sabbath day. Next week, we're going to be looking at that third piece of this salvation process. And some of you might be wondering, well, sanctification, it feels like you covered it. That's the process of being made holy. And that's oftentimes where we end that conversation, but there's actually a third part, and we call it glorification. It's that final step in the salvation process. Before we take off, I'd like to pray with you all. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for who you are. Lord, you're good to us. When we fall and we make a mess out of things, Lord, you're right there with your hand to lift us back up. You're not concerned about the stumble, but the will to keep walking. Lord, I ask that as we journey through this space, through this week, through this year, that we remember to put our hand in yours. In your name I pray, amen.